We'll call the meeting to order. We'll start off with our City Council staff report with Deborah Aowen, City Clerk, Chief of Council Operations. Deborah.
Thank you and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. I have no report other than a point of privilege cleared through the chairs to wish my youngest, Gentry Owen, a happy 6th birthday to him.
Thank you. So that will forever be on the internet. Happy birthday. Very good. Okay, we'll move on to our City Council open discussion. Anybody have anything? Councilor Brown.
Just a point of privilege. I do have a 5:30 appointment, so if I'm leaving, it's not because I'm mad about any presentation.
If the mayor, yes, so don't take it personally if Councilor Anderson.
Last week I had the privilege of attending the first Premier Lutheran Social Services Mentoring Awards program, and first time for me. And I wanted to say thank you for the experience, and it's a wonderful program that they have going on throughout the city, helping kids at risk. And if you have any opportunity to spend one day a week, or I think it's maybe a couple hours with a child, that this is a great program to join into. Once again, that's the first Premier Lutheran Social Services Mentoring Program.
Very good, Kenny. Anybody else? We do have we didn't have a meeting last week on our committees, right? Because we had a joint meeting. And we do have a meeting coming up after this, our land use, right?
That's correct, Councilor Jameson. And the plan is, if I can just give a
2-minute
snippet about this, not knowing how long this meeting will go, the event center presentation especially, what we're looking at is, if you look at the items that are on the agenda for Land Use Committee, there is one in particular that staff has been working on for an extended period of time, and we have reviewed in the past. And so what we're looking at is we'll very likely, if we're short on time, we will meet as a committee. Very likely, it's our goal to do the first item on the agenda, the rental housing registration process, and then probably, but I'm not going to promise until we're into it, until we see what time this meeting adjourns, we probably will defer the transit route update and the Chapter 4 licensed manufacturing homes ordinance review. So just kind of a heads up that we do want to work on that first piece, but we'll probably defer the rest of it. But we'll let you know at the end of this meeting.
Okay, very good. Councilor Aguilar.
Mr. Chair, in your absence last week, we did not have time for questions following the mayor's presentation. So I do know that Councilor Brown had raised his hand. I was wondering whether prior to the presentations this afternoon, whether the council would want to go back and ask any questions that they may have had over last week's presentation.
Well, I'd certainly hate to see Councilor Brown leave early and then not be able to participate.
Councilor Aguilar is assuming I remember what that question was. If it comes to me, I may ask it. Thank you.
I was able to watch that presentation on the internet, and I do have a few questions, but I'd be willing to wait just to keep everything together. I would just make one other note here, though, that if I could, that this is the first time that the full council has been together during an informational since we've appointed Dean Karski on the council. You know, I just wanted to say this, just like at Stampede when somebody gets out of the hot box there. The Sioux Falls Council is at full strength.
Are you saying welcome back? Is that a
yes,
roundabout way? Thank you.
Yes. All right, well, anyway, if we don't have anything else for open discussion, anybody? Okay, we'll move on then to our presentation so we can get through it as fast as we can here. We're going to start off with our Railroad Relocation Fund internal audit from Rich Oaksel, our lead internal auditor. Hello, Rich.
Good afternoon, Council. I'll be brief. I know we have a full agenda here, so you should have in front of you a hard copy of the report. It's a very brief report. This audit project was authorized in our annual audit plan that you as council members approved. And the purpose of the report was just to briefly identify the purpose and the history of this Railroad Relocation Fund and the activity to date in the fund. And additionally, the results of a financial review by the South Dakota DOT in regards to activity on this fund. Those results are summarized. So I'll just go very briefly over the history. It goes back more than 10 years ago to 2000 when the first activity related to railroad relocation occurred. The city hired a firm, TKDA. We had 2 agreements with them. And the 2 agreements, we paid approximately $250,000 on those 2 projects, and that was paid out of the second penny sales tax. This had to do with the Phillips to the Falls project and also with the Pasley Park underpass. And then in 2006, our congressional delegation was able to secure us funds, an earmark of $40 million. And in response, the city created a fund, 254, to identify the activity, the revenue and expenditures from this money that was allocated by Congress. And on the bottom of page 2 of your report, it shows how that money is administered. The Congress appropriates the funds, the Federal Highway Administration awards the funds, and then the South Dakota DOT oversees the funds as the local arm of the federal agency and verifies compliance with the various requirements. And the City of Sioux Falls is what's known as the LPA, the local public agency. We're the ultimate user of the funds. And as far as the activity to date, on page 3, almost all of the money that's been expended has been to pay the consultant HWS for the environmental assessment. There was a small amount of funds that were used for property appraisal and some legal fees, but most of the funds were to HWS Consulting. Recently they merged with the, I don't know if I can pronounce this right, but the company is Alfred Benish and Company, so their name changed, but it's still the same folks that are doing this. And you can see, we just summarized briefly the expenditures since 2006, since the fund was created. As you can see, in 2010, there was no activity, there's no expenditures. That was because of the financial review by the South Dakota DOT. And on page 4 of your report, we have a few bullet points there. They did a financial review. As I said before, they're tasked with verifying compliance. So there's an audit office in Pierre that reviewed documentation from the city and from the consultant, and they had a number of audit issues. For example, they identified the controls in place were inadequate for assuring that federal regulations were being followed by HWS, the city, and the South Dakota DOT on this project. They said there was a general lack of oversight on progress payments. The stakeholder communication was not effective. They identified work without proper approvals. A contract was executed prior to the DOT and the city having a funding agreement in place. And the contract, in their opinion, was vague and poorly written. And based upon what they observed from interviewing staff and reviewing documents, there appeared to be a lack of understanding of how to comply with the state and federal regulations. So in response, the DOT and the city management agreed to corrective action. So on the bottom of page 4, it's a brief summary of what was done to respond to the audit comments. As mentioned by Public Works several weeks ago at their April 4th briefing, they came up with a comprehensive management plan by DOT, the consultant, and the city to address those issues. The purpose of that plan was to address roles and responsibilities and have a timeline for communication. The plan is comprehensive and should address most of the concerns of the auditors. Another concern was that the audit pointed out there needed to be an amendment to the agreement, which was completed on February 14th of this year to that agreement with HWS. And the audit also recommended there be more training provided by the South Dakota DOT to municipalities that are receiving these funds so they understand what the requirements are. And so DOT has made arrangements to provide more education to municipalities about what the requirements are and how to comply with the requirements. You've received a briefing, as I said, I think on April 4th, and you'll receive another briefing on July 5th. So every quarter you'll be receiving a briefing from Public Works. Joshua Peterson is the project manager. And so the project is on track, and as on the top of page 4, there's the timeline. Right now they're getting through the environmental assessment, and if that goes as planned in next year in 2012, there should be some design work. And the construction, if all goes as planned, by the end of 2014, we should have downtown tracks removed and relocated. That's according, if everything falls into place. And as I reviewed the briefing from several weeks ago, Joshua Peterson did say that, that's if everything falls into place, but he believed that was an achievable timeline. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer those. We have some people from Public Works as well. So,
Questions for Rich? Councilor Erpenbach.
I just have one question, Rich. On the bottom of page 4 in that management, the agreement between the state and the city, the first bullet point said they were going to be done by the end of March of 11. Do you know, or can someone let me know, did that get completed on time?
That is completed. I believe that was done within the last few weeks. I know Joshua Peterson had a copy of that plan.
Okay.
All
right. I hadn't recalled that.
So that at the time of the report, it was about 80% complete, and I think
Right.
it was finished up. So
Okay, good.
there is a plan in place. So.
Good. Thank you.
And I would like to mention, too, is that that steering committee has been reorganized, and that steering committee is meeting regularly. That's the consultant, it's the railroad, the city staff, all the parties, all the stakeholders are meeting regularly. So,
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions for Rich? So, Rich, you're guaranteeing this by 2014? Is that what you said?
well, I wish I could. I wish I could. But I can't. So.
Tough job. All right. Thanks, Rich.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to our, if we could get a drum roll, please, maybe. Move on to our next presentation with the Event Center. Do I have that right? Mark Cotter is going to introduce everybody. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Council Chair and Councilors. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Today, you'll hear from the 3 national firms that we've hired to advance the evaluation of the Event Center. We'll start off with St. Combs Deathless. You've seen them from periodic times as we've gone through what we consider Phase 1, which is to evaluate the arena convention center site alongside the downtown site. They are teamed in conjunction with Coke Hazard Architects from Sioux Falls. Mortensen Construction will present immediately after them, and they were key in working with St. Combs Deathless, as some of the items in the evaluation criteria speak to cost differentials, and you'll hear from Mortensen on what those cost differentials are from one site to the other site. Then you'll hear from David Stone with the Economic and Development Impact Study to really look into what the economics are for this event center. One of the items that would potentially help, because it is a fairly lengthy presentation, if we could take your questions at the end, that would be ideal. Certainly if you have a key question that you want to get clarified, we'll do the best we can, but it would work best for the way the presentation's laid out to address questions at the end. We have provided all the city councilors a binder, as well as the clerk's office. This one can be the official one that gets left with the clerk's office. There is a number of colored prints. It's all available online, but if someone wants to actually come as a member of the public and look through the document, they're more than welcome to actually come to the clerk's office and look at those as we go forward. Again, let's get started. It's fairly lengthy. We'll start with St. Combs Deathless, Don Deathless, and then we'll proceed right into Mortensen Construction. Don?
Okay. Good evening. My name is Don Deathless. I wanted to take you through this. What they've asked us to do is, since we may have new viewers, to take you through the whole thing for the Phase 1. So Hopefully a lot of you have seen this, but basically what we did at the beginning of the study was start to look at possible downtown sites for the event center. So we kind of zoomed out, looked at every possible site downtown, and there were numerous sites. And we also looked at the access of downtown to say how would they get to an event center coming in on 10th and 11th, 6th and 8th in Minnesota were key access routes into downtown. We then took an examination of overall downtown parking, and we investigated from the Walker Report, from driving, from Google Maps, from counting, and we looked at privately owned surface lots, publicly owned surface lots, and both types of garages as well to understand the full supply downtown. We then quickly took 9 or 10 sites and narrowed it down to 3. A large part of was based on availability and whether people were willing to sell and what their positives and negatives were. So the 3 sites we identified are the 3 up on the image, which are Sharapa site, which is number 1, which is the one in the middle, which was formerly 5 years ago known as the Zip Feed site. Number 2 was the Sioux Steel site. And that was currently where the Sioux Steel business is. And the third is what we call the rail lines site, and that is on partially where the switch yards are currently. And those were the 3 sites that we thought were due more study. And then what we did is we put together a site evaluation criteria, and we've used this same criteria that you're seeing here to compare the eventual downtown site with the convention center site. So all of these criteria that you're seeing, a lot of them are based on first cost and first value. None of them have economic impact because the city has hired a separate economic impact study, so we've taken those out of ours. But there's such things as the site availability and timing, the parking, is the property there and what does it cost to buy, how do we add parking to the site, can you get there both by pedestrian and by auto, the site size, location, infrastructure, the building costs for each site, because there is a variance, the site opportunities and challenges, how you would share amenities and spaces, compatibility, and finally site exposure and image. Together they all add up to 100 points. So then what we did is we took the 3 sites, we investigated them further, we started rating them, did further analysis, and what really the bottom line was, and we've explained this before, is that the Sharapa site rose to the top. It has as good as parking as you are going to get downtown. It has good access. You have landowners, only 2 landowners and they're both cooperative, so that was important to it. So the code you're seeing is the numeric code. It got 75 out of 100. The color is more like the traffic light code, where green means go ahead, yellow means caution, and red means there's a major problem or you might want to stop on that criteria. So Sharapa was highly rated for downtown, 75 on 100. And again, we have some further images, and this I think relates to what we'll be comparing it on the convention center site. One of the key aspects for both sites, quite honestly, convention center as well as the downtown ones, was the parking, location, and availability. What you are seeing on this chart is the dark blue line is 1,600 feet, which is 4 blocks, and that is measured from a front door of the event center lobby to your parking space. The dotted red line is 2,000 feet, which is a 5-block walking distance to get from your parking space to the front door. So we looked at Sharapa, which had good parking for downtown. The best parking, I should say, Sioux Steel, which was not as good. The rail lines, which was good, but they were not as available on this site. And then finally, again, what we came to was the conclusion that the existing Sharapa site was the best available downtown. So we took that information and we started comparing it to the convention center. One of the key issues, again, is parking location and availability. So what you can see is the Sharapa site is located just south of 6th, about a half block north of 8th, just west of the track lines. And so you see the current location of where parking would be on this diagram. Then we took the convention center, and what we said is, in this case, you have a bunch of red-colored parking. That is controlled by the arena or one of the other buildings on site. So the difference is on the convention center site, you're almost surrounded by parking. But if you just had a 12,000-seat arena, which is what we're designing to, there would be enough parking at the convention center site. However, as you all know, there are numerous buildings out there. There's the baseball stadium, the arena, the convention center, Howard Wood Field, and finally a new event center if it was to go there. So because of that, we said you would need additional parking at the convention center site in order to make it work. Just like downtown, you need additional parking in order to make it work. So what we did is we stepped back at the Sharapa site. We said, where could we build the parking? So the lighter blue zone you're seeing mostly to the east and south of the proposed event center, those would be surface parking lots. And those could be built at about a tenth of the cost as a parking garage. We also looked at 3 different options for parking garages, one of which is attached to the event center on the south side of it. It would actually cover the loading dock. That would be one option there. The next option is directly to the west of that, across the river, up above, right there, and that is approximately at the Raven site. And the final one we looked at is just north of the large transit lot in the bus stop, and that is also a large garage. So what we concluded is at the end of the day, in order to make the Sharapa site work, you would need at the very minimum to build all of the surface parking lots we are showing, as well as build the garage that is attached to the event center. The other thing we were asked to look at is if the tracks had been available at opening, what would be another logical way the parking could be laid out. So what this shows is taking the other surface lots we had already shown, adding 3 large parking lots, basically south of 8th, and then the one between 6th and 8th, and then the one north of 6, kind of going from south to north. That would be available for surface parking, which would make it relatively affordable. The concern, though, is that at the opening of the arena, the rail line parking may not be available and most likely will not be available if the arena opens in the fall of 2014. And again, what we've always said is in order for the building to be successful, you need enough parking in the right location for people to get from the parking into the building to make it a success. So what we then did is we looked at the convention center, and again, what we looked at is we determined that we needed approximately 800 additional spaces, a little more than 800 at the convention center in order to make it work. And again, that is in order to do the simultaneous events of a 12,000-seat event center plus other facilities. So what we're showing here, the large blue lot is a 750-space surface lot. That is a surface lot that has been put on 5 of the 11 McCart fields. And then just to the north of it, there's a small lot that would be on school property that's 50 spaces. And then the final lot is right in front of the convention center on the south side. It's a radio lot there, and that would be about 87 spaces. And a lot of that is being used for parking with people with disabilities, so they can be right at the front door for not only the event center, but for the convention center or the arena as well. So our determination was in order to make this site work as well, we needed about 887 spaces. All of this land is owned or would be cooperation because of the school district, and it's all surface lots, so on a relative basis, it's affordable. And then we wanted to take you quickly of how the buildings would be arranged on either site. This will be studied in greater detail at this upcoming phase, but we want people to understand how it fits in. This is the Sharapa site. North is to the right on this diagram. The Sharapa building is directly up above the event center. The red building is what could be a future commercial development at the event center. The idea is, in both cases, the event level, which is the ice level, would be put at grade, because at either site there's either rock or water underground. So we basically are going to create a slab on grade with an elevated concourse, and the spectators come in and go up. So at the event center you'd have the locker room, storage, all of the services down at this level. We'd have loading and staging. We would have a lobby at the southwest corner just next to Sharapa, and on the north side of the building, which is on the right of this diagram. People would come in, and then they would go up elevators, stairs, and escalators, and they would go on to the next concourse level, which you're seeing here. The idea is the concourse would go all the way around the building. We'd have services such as restrooms and concessions on the concourse, and then that would provide access to the lower bowl. We would have one level up, we would have a separate private suite level and club level, and all in, we'd have about 8,500 seats currently is what we're showing on the lower bowl and on the suite level. And this is the vast majority of the setup you're going to use for the more minor sports, the local teams, smaller events. It creates a real intimate venue. But we're designing a 12,000-seat arena, so what we then have is an upper level, an upper concourse that you'd again continue on up with escalators, stairs, or elevators, go up to this level, and you'd have a full bowl, and this is showing it in the basketball configuration for 12,000 seats for large events. And then also we're showing it the full bowl for ice events, which would be hockey, and also that's the same configuration for circus, arena football, arena soccer, and arena lacrosse. So this is how we would lay it out conceptually. You can see we are off the switching yards, so we don't need to get the tracks in order to build this building at the downtown location. And the dark gray area is the parking garage that would be stacked above loading and would link into each of the levels of the event center. Then at the convention center site, it's a very similar building. The biggest difference here you can start to see is we would back this building up and attach it to the convention center, so you would be able to link the convention center floor through the meeting rooms to what will become a large arena floor, so you increase your flat floor capabilities for additional events and more flexibility. But other than that, it's very similar to the Sharapa site, and you come in and you go up escalators to the concourse level, same configuration, up to the suite level, up to the upper concourse level, then you see the whole bowl for basketball, and then you see the whole bowl for ice hockey. And again, this building will be designed for the widest flexibility to attract the most events to Sioux Falls, which either site we choose. So finally what we did is we then stepped back, took our criteria, and said, how would we rate the two different sites? And the way we've come up with the rating, again, to remind everyone, they're very first cost value oriented. They are also based on the assumption that we do not have the tracks available for surface parking upon opening, and that we are using the McCart fields for 750 of our spaces, only 5 of the 11, however. So again, what we rated them on was the site availability and timing. Convention Center, we gave a 10. The city owns basically all of the land. Sharapa, we gave an 8. You have to buy the land. You have 2 very cooperative landowners, however, and there's only 2 people to deal with, but you still need to go through the process and cost of doing that. Available parking, the Convention Center, it's hard to beat parking when you basically have a parking lot surrounding your front doors. So it's very close at the Convention Center. Downtown lacks more parking, especially, again, assuming we don't have the rail sites. But you can add it in the future. Properties for acquisition and cost. Again, only 2 properties you have to buy at Sharapa. You own the rest at Convention. Additional parking needs and cost. Again, both sites you have to build parking. At the Convention Center, it's all surface, and at downtown, most of it's surface, but we have 1 garage we're building without the railroad tracks if we don't get those. Transportation and pedestrian access, we think the traffic works well at both sites. Both we've costed out for what we would call in the business minor improvements to make it work. Neither of the sites needs major improvements. We both think, or all think both sites could work, and traffic access will be good. Site size and location, again, they are reasonable sites. They're not the most spacious on earth, but the building fits effectively on both sites. Available infrastructure. This is one where the Convention Center got a yellow light because basically it costs more to do the infrastructure at the convention center site. The rock is right below the surface at the convention center, especially on the western part where we would build the event center, and also the sewer is at capacity going from the existing arena. So to put it at the convention center, you need to spend more money on utilities at that site. And infrastructure, but it's really sewer and undergrounding that's costing you. Building costs for each site, that's the building itself, not off-site, and basically, as you've seen, we're building approximately the same building at either site, so that is a wash. Site opportunities and challenges, we think both sites have good opportunities and relatively limited challenges, so those are high ratings. Ability to share amenities and spaces, and this is one of the big differentials. At the convention center site, they have a large commercial kitchen that serves the convention center. We can use that in total. We would have to do small additions to it, and there's also storage areas we could share. The other big deal that you'll hear in the economic study is there is the ability to share and get more events because of the shared flat floors of the combined facility, so that is one difference between the two of them. Finally, the last two, neighborhood compatibility. We think both sites, the event center would blend in quite well, and then also the site exposure and image at both sites we think is very good and was highly rated. So at the end of the day, our conclusion was, again, based on the availability of not having the rail lines there, that we gave the convention center site an 85 out of 100, and the Sharapa site was a 75 out of 100. Now I want to introduce Greg Huber from Mortensen Construction, who's worked hand in hand with us on the cost, especially on these off-site costs, to understand the difference between the two sites, so he can take you through that.
Thank you, Don, and good afternoon, Council. I'm Greg Huber. I'm a Senior Design Phase Manager for Mortensen Construction, and we were tasked with providing cost feedback to St. Combs during the development of the site selection process. So one of the key things that I wanted to talk about is that we analyzed cost differences between the two sites. What we didn't do is analyze the cost in whole. So the sites that we analyzed were Sharapa Place, downtown, and the convention center site. What we found when we analyzed those two sites is that the topography was very similar, as well as the geotechnical characteristics of both sites were very similar. So it didn't lend itself to different foundation systems depending on what site you chose. Grading would be similar. So what we were able to quickly conclude by doing that detailed analysis was that the building would cost the same no matter what site you built it on. So that was one of the premises of our study. As far as constructability, they're both fairly tight sites. There's going to be disruption avoidance no matter where you're at. Sharapa has an existing office building that's operating. Convention center as well, so there's going to be some logistical challenges that we'll overcome. So really where it landed as far as the cost differential that we were able to study was the cost of parking, the cost of street improvements, the cost of utilities, and then the cost of land acquisition. So up on the screen, what we've provided is a summary. So Sharapa, we had a structured parking ramp, a 357 stall parking ramp that's in line with St. Combs. And then we had 627 surface spaces that Don also showed in blue. That cost was about $9.766 million. Street improvements came out to be about $1.066 million. Cost of utilities, and again, these are utilities basically taking it from the building to the available street. And then land costs were $866,000. At the convention center site, we had parking. The total surface parking spaces were 887 surface parking spaces. Street improvements were a little bit less at $667,000. And then utilities, so that's something Don actually went into a little bit. So So utilities was a major difference. There's a lack of available sewer infrastructure, so it needed to go almost a half mile at the convention center site to tie into a size of sewer that's big enough for a large event center such as this, as well as the rock is a lot higher. So the geotechnical profile is that the rock is almost at grade. It's from 1 foot to 4 feet below the surface. So it costs more to trench that in. And then the land is city-owned. So in conclusion, the Sharapa site was a more expensive site to build on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark Cotter.
Well, first, thanks, Don, and thank you, Greg, for those two presentations. Now we'll take you into the next phase, which is David Stone with AECOM, and he'll take you through, this is a detailed presentation on the Economic Development Impact Analysis Study. David.
Thanks, Mark. There are actually two of us here. I'm with Lance Harris. I'll let him introduce himself in a moment. But we are from AECOM Economics. I wanted to, since we've been a little less visible in the last couple months than St. Combs and Mortensen and haven't been in town as much and haven't been in as many of these presentations, I wanted to spend just a minute to give a little introduction on our firm as well as the two of us individually. We are, as Mark said, part of AECOM Economics. We were acquired by AECOM about 3-4 years ago, going back about 55 years. The firm we worked for was originally called Economics Research Associates, and we were generally real estate and land planning, real estate and land use planners and consultants. Essentially, we, as I like to say, we help plan just about anything you can put on a piece of land. Particularly, we have a particular name in the in attractions and public assembly facilities like this. Again, we've worked on, and I think this is something that hopefully helped us through this competitive process to end up here today. We have experience not only in sports and convention facilities, but also downtown, broader planning districts, convention centers, attractions, museums, theaters, et cetera, as the list on the screen shows. Personally, my work focuses on sports, entertainment, recreation, and convention facilities. So I've worked on feasibility, planning, economic impact, and other types of studies for the planning, expansion, and ongoing operations of arenas, event centers, stadiums, convention conference centers, amphitheaters, theaters, facilities like that across the country. Again, largely on the feasibility and economic impact side. I'll let Lance talk about himself for a moment, too.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Lance Harris. I'm a senior associate with AECOM based out of Minneapolis. As well as doing economic impact analysis, I focus more specifically on real estate as well as economic development potentials for both public and private clients. So my particular expertise in this study is looking at spin-off development potentials for the site alternatives.
So with that, I want to start to walk through our report. The full report is a 50, 60-some page document, so hopefully I'll find the right level of detail for this presentation without getting too bogged down in some details. But essentially, we've split up our report in a handful of different types of impacts that the city has asked us to look into. So the biggest, probably the most important one, and the one with, I guess, the most meat to it, is the spending impacts from facility operations and also from the one-time impacts from construction. So I'll start with that, and first I want to go through just a kind of a fairly brief introduction to the concept of economic impacts, because economic impact is one of those terms that if you ask 10 different people what it is, you may get 11 different answers. So I want to make sure everyone's on the same page and you understand what we mean by kind of the true definition of economic impacts. So walking through this chart, if you start at the top, first thing we need to do when we're talking about economic impacts, a true economic impact is talking about spending that comes from outside of one area and is captured within an area. So in this case, we're interested in impacts that are captured by the City of Sioux Falls by people who live outside of Sioux Falls and come to the city for various types of events. So we essentially net out any spending ultimately that is made by local residents, and I'll walk you through that in a little bit. So we're talking about spending both within the facility on tickets, on food and beverage, merchandise, concessions, things like that, and also associated with someone's visit to Sioux Falls outside of the facility, whether it's for a hotel room or a meal before or after an event or a car rental or things like that. That is the direct, what we consider to be the direct spending, which is essentially money coming out of one person's pocket and going into another person's pocket. Again, whether it's a hotelier or someone who's selling Pepsi at the arena or someone selling tickets. Then that spending circulates throughout an economy a certain number of times before it eventually leaves the economy, and we estimate that through multipliers that are developed by the federal government. The sum of those are what we consider to be the total impacts, the total spending impacts, and then once we have the total spending impacts, we're able to estimate other types of impacts such as job creation for local residents, the income that's associated with those jobs, and sales, and also hotel room nights that are generated by non-local residents, and then based on all that spending, the tax revenues that are captured by the city based on the various taxes and the tax levels and tax rates, at the city level. So with that introduction, and also actually as long as I'm on this slide, so these would recur annually from facility operations and would change a little bit based on changes in facility operations because you won't have the exact same number of events or attendees every year, so they would change slightly from year to year. Could also go through a similar flow chart here for the construction impacts, but the difference would be the impacts we would consider for this type of project would be job creation for construction workers who live in Sioux Falls, the income associated with that, and also sales to local firms that are vendors or suppliers to the construction project. There wouldn't be the fiscal impacts because as a public project you wouldn't be paying sales tax, for example, but the concepts are the same otherwise. So this, when we start to quantify the spending impacts from operations, this is an important slide, and I'll probably be referring back to this because the impacts, as I said, are really based on who uses the facility and how many people use the facility, in addition to where they come from and different characteristics like that. So if you look at we were not asked as part of our scope of work to develop a future events calendar for the facility. So what we did was work with SMG and Global Spectrum, who currently manage the two facilities and are, as you probably know, are the two main companies in the country that do this type of work. So we spent a lot of time working with them to develop an events calendar for the events center at both sites. This slide summarizes it by event type. You see the right side of the slide is the events calendar, and we're looking at 1 year. We chose 2016 as what we call a stabilized year of operations. Essentially, for a facility like this, operations generally kind of build up over a few years, and then they essentially stabilize at a certain level. So this is what we've pegged as 2016, a stabilized year of demand. The right half of the table is the events and attendance at the downtown site, and then to the left is the events and attendance at the Arena Convention Center site. The main difference, I don't know if there's a laser pointer on here or not. Is there? Oh, sorry. So, well. Anyways, the main difference in usage of the two sites is about 2/3 of the way down the flat floor events, and because of the contiguous space that Don talked about earlier, because of that, we would anticipate that you'd be able to do a lot more what we call flat floor events. So conventions, conventions, conferences, consumer shows, things like that, because you would have the adjacent convention center and arena, that usage would increase significantly compared to having a standalone facility at the downtown site. So again, this is kind of the main source of a lot of the differences in the dollar figure impacts that I'll get to on later slides. So once we have those assumptions, again, that were developed with the help of SMG and Global Spectrum, we had to make a lot of other assumptions on the characteristics of every attendee at the facility at both sites. So again, as I talked about before, when we talk about gross and net impacts, it matters where the attendees come from, where they live. So we've made assumptions based on past ticket sales at the current facilities, based on past ticket sales of other similar facilities. We've assumed what % of people live in Sioux Falls versus live outside of Sioux Falls. And for both of those types of attendees, how much time they spend in town associated with their event, and in detail how much money they will spend while they're in town on various types of items, be it hotel rooms, inside the facility, outside of the facility, on, again, hotel rooms, whether it's a meal before and after an event, car rental, et cetera. And there's some couple of very large tables in our report that I won't bore you with or walk you through right now, but all of our assumptions are laid out in the report. So our first step is to look at the gross spending that everyone who attends facility events contributes. Again, this is regardless of where they live. The important numbers to focus on this slide is the yellow line and the line below it. So what we're saying here is that the Arena Convention Center site, the new event center, would generate approximately $43 million in gross spending. Again, that's everyone who walks through the doors of the building. At the downtown site, it would be just under $30 million. And those two sites, you see the translation into room nights. Again, the big difference, or the cause of the difference between these two sets of numbers at the two sites is, again, the flat floor events. And the flat floor events, they tend to be longer events, multi-day events, and they attract a larger share of non-local residents, which again kind of drives the differences and impacts between these two sites. So again, this is the gross, considering everybody. We then narrow it down and essentially subtract out all the spending by local residents based on our assumptions of where people live. Again, the important lines to focus on in this table is, again, the yellow line and the room nights line below it. So this is saying at the Arena Convention Center site, the new event center would generate $29 million in new spending to Sioux Falls from non-Sioux Falls residents. And the equivalent number at the downtown site is $18 million. The hotel room nights number has not changed from the previous slide because common sense tells us that we've assumed that no local residents would be spending the night in hotel rooms. They would all be staying at home, and it's the non-locals who are spending nights in hotel rooms. So the next step is to take that net number that I just showed on the previous slide and apply these multipliers that the federal government comes up with on an industry-by-industry basis for how long different types of spending stay in a local economy, in this case the city, before flowing out and leaving the local economy entirely. So if I were to focus on one number of all these last few slides I've shown, if you ask what is the spending impacts from annual operations, it would be this line, this yellow line in this slide, just under $45 million at the Arena Convention Center site, and excuse me, about $28.5 million at the downtown site. And again, the main differences flows from that event table, with the big difference in flat floor events and the increased attendance at those events. Again, because of the contiguous floor space you have at the Arena Convention Center site. So moving on from the spending, what we do next is we're able to estimate, based on the spending in the different types of industries, the job creation in the equivalent industries. Again, working with SMG and Global Spectrum, we have assumptions of what the facility staff itself would be inside the facility at the two sites. And again, using the spending figures and local wage levels, we're able to estimate what the job creation, what number of jobs would be supported on an annual basis, and the equivalent, or the associated income that would go along with those jobs. So again, the focus would be on the overall number in the yellow lines, 236 jobs at the Arena Convention Center site compared to 139 at the downtown site, which translates into about $6.4 million in local income at the event center, being at the Arena Convention Center site, and just under $3.2 million at the downtown site. The next step is to look at the fiscal impacts, which are funds that come back directly to the city, and this is a relatively simple exercise based on the current city taxes and their rates. Sales and use tax, for example, the 2% city share, and the different types of spending that it applies to. And we go down the list there. The total, again, the important part is in the yellow line, total annually of about $1.2 million of new city revenues at for the event center at the Arena Convention Center site, and approximately $700,000 at the downtown site. So that covers the annual operations, and as I said, those would recur on an annual basis with some slight changes based on actual changes in demand. we look separately at the construction impacts, which would occur just from the one-time construction project. So on the upper left, that table, Don and Greg have already covered these numbers. We've assumed the cost to construct the actual facility is the $99.5 million at both sites. Again, Greg's gone through the additional kind of off-site infrastructure improvement costs at both sites. So we've got about a $6 million difference at the two sites, with the cost at the downtown site being a little bit higher, which then if we go to the impacts, or the summary of our impacts on the other table on this slide, the impacts are accordingly a little bit higher because of the greater costs. But essentially, we've developed these. So as I said before, the construction impacts considered are local jobs to local residents who participate in the construction project, and local companies who are suppliers and vendors to the project. So we've made assumptions about where those people would live and what % of the spending would be captured by local firms. So as you see, they're very similar at the two sites because the total cost numbers are very similar at the two sites. So don't want to spend too much time on this because the impacts are pretty similar. We don't see great differences between the two sites. But again, we see about approximately $30 million in spending on local construction workers, about $27 to $29 million to local firms, and that spending on local labor would translate into between 730 some to 775 local jobs for the construction project itself. So that wraps up our summary of the annual economic impacts and the one-time economic fiscal impacts from the construction project. I'm going to turn over to Lance to talk about what we see for the potential for spin-off development at the two sites.
So, using a number of quantitative and qualitative metrics, which are detailed within our analysis, we came up with this illustrative development program. And what we're estimating in terms of total valuation, and that's either sales price or the cost of the construction of these various land uses, we see that the downtown site could yield $51.1 million in spin-off development in comparison to $6.7 at the Arena Convention Center site, and that would translate in terms of property tax, $228,000 annually to the city versus $30,000 with the Arena Convention Center site.
So another category we were asked to look at is what kind of effect the construction project itself would have on its immediate environment and the operations of the facility. Some of this has been touched on earlier. Two main categories that we focused on. Number one would be changes in operational expenses resulting from being located next to the existing facilities, or again being a standalone facility downtown. Again, through talking with Global Spectrum and SMG, we have identified some efficiencies in being at the Arena Convention Center site through having reduced staff and some other expenses that would go along with that would also be reduced in conjunction with having reduced staff. So what we've estimated is about $600,000 a year in saved expenses, assuming a site at the Arena Convention Center compared to downtown. We've also assumed, because of the greater use of the facility at the Arena Convention Center site, there are also some increased revenues to the facility being at that site. Greg and Don talked about the second half of this slide a little bit. We would expect a little bit of disruption to existing convention center operations, especially since those 4 meeting rooms that are on the end of the convention center that would attach to the new event center would essentially be taken out of inventory, at least temporarily, during construction. But we also know during the construction of the convention center, the arena's operations were minimally, if not at all, affected at all. So beyond that, beyond those 4 meeting rooms, we don't expect a whole lot of disruption, especially with proper planning and timing and thinking things through ahead of time. We don't expect a whole lot of disruption of convention center or arena operations from the construction of the new event center at that site. The last bullet on the page, Greg already covered that. Again, we would expect about $12.5 million in other necessary costs at the downtown site compared to about $6.5 million at the Arena Convention Center site. One last main category of impacts that we were asked to look at were kind of a catch-all other / non-quantitative impacts that a community could benefit from construction and operation of this type of facility, and these are essentially regardless of site. I would first say that these impacts would kind of be tempered by the fact that you already have the arena here and you're already benefiting from these impacts in many ways. And again, they're qualitative. They are some of them are more warm and fuzzy than others. Certainly not things that we could put a number to like the other ones that we went through. But these were some other things that we were asked to kind of just mention in our report and talk about briefly. So again, there's some more detail in our report. But essentially, what we find around the country and through academic research and what other operators and other cities say is that obviously these facilities are often very high-profile facilities in the community, whether it's a large or small community. They attract a lot of attention in the media. The events that are within the facilities are covered by the media, whether it's on a local, statewide, national, regional, or national basis. Helps to raise the profile of a community. We covered, Lance talked about the opportunity to stimulate other development. Then there's also this kind of notion it's kind of an academic term of psychic income, which is really kind of the warm and fuzzy term for people in a community being able to come together and rally around a certain cause. And these aren't unique or specific to event centers or arenas. You could also apply them to a museum or an outdoor amphitheater or a festival or just a kind of a downtown area in general, but they certainly apply to this type of facility. We also see in here often around the country that this type of facility as a main quality of life factor is often used by companies or at least one of the many factors used by companies in deciding where to locate or relocate, also often used by residents in determining where they may want to live in the future. So these next few slides essentially summarize the quantitative impacts that we covered at the beginning of the presentation. And what we really wanted to focus on here was the differences between the two sites. So when we talk about the annual ongoing impacts from operations, as we showed before, we estimated that the spending impacts would be about $16.5 million greater at the Arena Convention Center site than the downtown site. And again, this all kind of goes back to those differences in facility usage and specifically the fact that the flat floor events are the higher impact generating events because again, they're multiple day events and they attract a higher share of non-local residents. Same reason for having greater impacts on the jobs and income and room night side. The jobs, approximately 100 more jobs per year at the Arena Convention Center site, associated $3.2 million in income that goes along with those jobs. Almost 37,000 room nights is the kind of delta between the Arena Convention Center site and the downtown sites. And on the fiscal impact side, the city tax revenues, we estimate them to be about $525,000 greater on an annual basis at the Arena Convention Center site. Then what Lance talked about, based on kind of our assumptions of the opportunities for spin-off development immediately surrounding the two sites, we estimate that would result in approximately $200,000 in incremental city property tax revenues per year. And lastly, as I talked about, the kind of last quantifiable economic impact that we were asked to look into, the differences in operating expenses at the two sites. As I said, with the help of SMG and Global Spectrum, we've identified about $600,000 in savings for having the facility at the Arena Convention Center site compared to downtown. And I don't know if we want to go back to Mark or... Okay.
Thank you, David and Lance. One thing, too, counselors, in your binder is a traffic study that's been included. We did not include that in the presentation tonight because essentially both sites work from a traffic standpoint, but in the cost differentials we have included the minor capacity improvements that we would make at either site based on the recommended site. So, but that is in there for you to see and read, and if you have questions on that in the future, we can address those. But from a cost perspective, they were fairly minor, but there is a detailed analysis of the traffic in the past. Just in summary, Don Defless took you through the detailed analysis and the site evaluation criteria that rated the convention center at 85 points and the downtown site at 75. Mortensen provided the cost differential out irrespective of the building to build at the downtown site and the Arena Convention Center site. And just now you've heard from David Stone that went through the economic impacts of having this facility at the Arena Convention Center site and the downtown site. We are here. We have internal staff. We also have the luxury of having these national experts here to answer your questions. And so I think what we'll do is we'll just do our best to field your questions, and also want to know that just based on the format tonight, that immediately following this, starting at 6 p.m., we will have a question and answer session where these professionals will be up on a podium and be able to answer the questions of the public. So with that, what questions do you have?
Questions for Mark or the professionals? Anybody? Councilor Erpenbach?
Actually, pretty basic to start with. I need time to process. But Mark, can you look at? It's in the Mortensen construction part of the report. We're talking about street improvements downtown is over $1 million, and in the convention center area, only $600,000 ish. What can we talk about? What street improvements need to happen downtown that are so much dramatically more expensive than the arena site?
Well, there's about $300,000 difference in the cost of downtown versus the arena, and most of those come from adding right turn lanes on at respective intersections. We want to make sure that as people have the opportunity to leave an event, and we've tried to predict that first by where they're going to park, and that all started several months ago about where is the parking available downtown, and then once those parking garages and surface lots are loaded, there's a predicted rate about how they will exit. And so we've looked at those patterns and see where the delays are, because if there's a delay in a downtown effect, if it's delayed at one intersection and it backs up through the next one, it starts to create that gridlock. So we want to make sure that if we can add a right turn lane, it can hopefully keep some of those areas flowing. There is a list of those improvements in the back of the binder. I can get that if you'd like me to. But essentially that's what it is. We know that as people leave a downtown event, or any event for that matter, you can see if traffic is starting to get queued up at an intersection, and you're likely going to pull off before you get there. But there's only so many of those opportunities to take before we need to make sure we add some capacity onto a series of those intersections to make sure we can move traffic and minimize delay.
One more question, Councilor Jameson. Mark, if you could talk then, what are the street improvements that would need to happen at the Arena Convention Center? And if you could put that in light of the planned improvements that are already happening there and the Russell Street project that's in the works.
Mm-hmm. Most of the improvements that you'll see, because we've factored in that with the DOT's funding, that the Russell Street improvements will be done. So those have been factored in, most of which are south and west of the Arena Convention Center site. We've got some intersections out there like Burnside. We've talked about prior to this project that we've got some capacity issues just on how those intersections are laid out. Some of them are at some odd angles. And so those are some of those improvements that we would try to enhance those operations, because when you add that much more traffic onto that system, we want to make sure traffic moves out there as well. There's some improvements that are identified at Kiwanis and Madison. Madison has the opportunity to move a lot of traffic east and west, but there are some enhancements that we can make to that as well. So there's a series of improvements, primarily though south and west of the site.
Councilor Aguilar.
Mark, one of the large differences in cost is parking. How sure are we that we can take those McCart fields and turn them into surface parking? Or what does have to be done in order for us to go forward with that part of the plan?
Well, there is a public process. I may have Mike Cooper speak more to that, if that's Mike.
Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. Once we've determined what the recommendation will be, and if that recommendation does include the use of McCart fields, there is a process that we'll go through that would include, first of all, working with the McCart family. There are still members of that family that we would stay in touch with in terms of what they would like to see planned for the future. Through the City Parks and Recreation Department, we'll determine, working with the Park Board, of whether they believe that the loss of those fields and the impact of the parking would change significantly the character of that as a public park facility. And so the Park Board would make a recommendation to the City Council. But ultimately, it will be the City Council determining whether or not those fields could be used, or should be used, and that potentially could become part of a public election if that would be determined to be the case by the City Council. So it's a process of you working with the McCart family, the Park Board, the community, and then ultimately coming to you, the City Council, to determine how we would impact the use of those fields in the future.
Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you. Probably for Don at this point.
Okay.
No. I've always had a question. I noticed on the parking charts that we've had there.
Right.
All the public or private lots that are being used there. Have we checked with those in the downtown area as to whether or not they'd be available?
No, and so what we've done is, we've taken a factor, so we've counted all the spaces, and then what we've assumed based on the Walker parking report is that for the public ones, only 75% of them would be available, both garages and surface lots, and 60% of the private lots would be available. However, when we did the analysis, if there's a sign and it's residential, which there's not that much residential parking downtown, but say the apartment buildings, like when we looked at the post office site, if there's a sign that says, for resident parking only and you will be towed, then those spaces were specifically not included because they were filled and they have no other use. But if it's a commercial lot, we've assumed the 65%. And then we've also made assumptions depending on the day and availability of on-street parking as well.
Okay.
So we're not assuming 100% of that parking being available downtown.
Then if I could, Dave, if I could have a couple with you. Average daily spending is one of the categories that you used here for for one of your assumptions. Do you have a round figure on that? Is it 120, 250?
I'd have to look at the report to give you the total number. What we did was break it down into different categories or different industries. So we have daily spending for this would apply only to non-local residents for hotels. The categories we use were hotels, outside of the facility. So we've got the inside.
It's in here, though?
Sorry?
It's in here?
It's all in the full report,
Okay.
certainly,
Okay.
yeah. So we have inside the facility spending on tickets, food and beverage, et cetera. Thank you.
Okay.
And then the categories we have outside the facility are food and beverage, retail and entertainment, transportation, and lodging. And it differs by type of event and type of attendee. So unfortunately, I can't give you one number. I can give you about 15 different numbers. I'm not sure you want all of them.
No, I'll look that up.
They're in the report, though.
I just seen this today, and so
Yeah.
I didn't know how much
Yeah,
it was broken down.
there are two big tables in the report, one for each site, and that's why I didn't want to get into it too much in this presentation, but it's
Okay.
all in the report.
Then just a couple, if you'd stay
Sure.
there. I've got a couple other papers folded over here. It appears to me that building it downtown would raise some property taxes significantly. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Through new development, yes.
New
certainly.
development and
Yeah.
different things like that, okay. Then there was one other one I had in here someplace, and that was, now I probably can't find it, but I will. As other people are asking, why don't you go ahead?
Councilor Intamin.
I have a question for Lance, I believe, Lance. Potential for spin-off development and other tax revenues in the downtown area. Can you explain a little bit to us about what you looked at for the additional, what that potential is? Could you get maybe into a little bit more detail on that, please?
Sure, absolutely. we looked at a number of factors that were specific to Sioux Falls, as well as looking at a number of other more academic or sort of experiences around the nation of what has happened in different communities. For downtown, we looked at historic development patterns. We used a number of metrics to see what has happened at the current Arena Convention Center site versus what's happening downtown. We also looked at what is there right now in terms of commercial and food and beverage space to see what has the best potential to benefit from new business. And then we also did, site analysis, looked at the specific sites, looked at the surrounding land uses, tried to get an inventory of what possibly could be redeveloped if there's an existing development there, or what land might become available in the future that could be developed. And as I mentioned before, we overlaid a number of academic studies which talk about catalytic developments and their various potentials. And from that, we tried to get an order of magnitude development program for sort of near-term development potentials at the two different sites. Again, within the report, it's all detailed and the specifics are described. But from that, and as well as, which I didn't mention, we had extensive conversations with local developers and within the community to get their opinion as well. And that was sort of the broad a broad overview of the methodology used to try to determine what those potentials may be.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Councilor Karski.
Yes, I actually do I have time for two questions, if you don't mind, Greg? First off is on the parking, follow-up to Councilor Aguilar's question, is do we have a plan B if the McCart Field thing doesn't come through? I've been through the neighborhoods out there in the West Sioux District and talked to probably 30 people that live out there, and they're really waiting for something to be built out there, but they don't want to be there when the facility gets built. So do we have a plan B?
Well, I think, and we've had that conversation, and I appreciate that. When we first kicked this off back in October, we looked at a number of different options out there, and that was one of them. I think our first takeaway is that we want to exhaust the public process here with McCart Fields. It is public land. There is a process that we feel like we can go to and still have a good balance of that parkland, but also fit the need of a new event center. So at this point, there are other options, just like going into that neighborhood of something of that sort. But I think right now we would focus on McCart Field.
Okay. And my second question, if I may, Councilor Jameson. Going back to where Councilor Enneman was looking at, we're talking about $51 million in additional downtown construction if we were to put it down there. Have we looked at the economic impact of what $51 million of construction would do downtown, jobs created, et cetera?
That's a good point.
Okay.
His answer is that was not included in the report.
Councilor Erpenbach. Oh, Councilor Rolfing.
That was the question, the 51 million. I'm not sure where you came up with 51 million.
It's on page, I'm not too sure of the page number, but the potential for spin-off development and other tax revenues.
Yeah, okay. I'm more interested in a rounder question, if Bob could answer this, or maybe you can, that if by chance, or if someday, it seemed like the biggest variable here to putting it downtown would have been the flat floor space. Am I correct with that, gentlemen? That would have been a evener, if you will, or even maybe a bigger, would have made this thing look a little different. What would happen? Can you give me a ballpark figure on these numbers if, by chance, the convention center was built downtown with an event center, or 5 years later, 10 years later, the convention center was a new convention center was built adjacent to a building, an event center downtown? Would this tend to even this out, make it better, or would it be about the same?
As the standalone, compared to a standalone downtown facility?
Right.
I think I understand your question correctly. I mean,
In other words,
I
if we
couldn't
move
give
the
you-
whole thing
Sure. If you moved the convention center downtown, essentially, with the
along
event
with
center.
the event center.
I hesitate to give you a ballpark number on anything off the top of my head or something like that, but my 30,000-foot answer, obviously, as I went through in the presentation, the big driver and the difference between the impacts is that contiguous floor space. So
Right.
certainly without further study, and again, at 30,000 feet, I would think, if you were able to theoretically pick up that space and put it next to an event center downtown, you would see similar impacts and similar dynamics. Absolutely.
Would it be similar, or would it be much, much better?
Again, without studying it further, I would start at the point where I would assume it's similar. You may have some dynamics downtown that would make them different, greater, lesser. I don't know, but certainly, again, having that space available to it would go a long way, regardless of whether it's downtown or at the convention center site.
Somewhere similar, more than likely. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's
Councilor Aguilar.
I have a what-if question. What if the railroad tracks had already been removed? Would that space be used for surface parking? So what happens if we do get them removed? Is there that potential? And in the construction, as it goes forward, do you build the building first and then do the parking lot? Again, a what-if question.
Sure, and I can start and Don can probably close. I think what we all know is that we're working toward the environmental assessment, and it's key as we walk through that process that we don't set plans in place that predict the outcome of the analysis of the environmental assessment, because from an objective standpoint, the federal regulators have to look at all the available alternatives of where the new switchyard will go, which includes the no-build, meaning do nothing. Certainly none of us in this room want that to happen. We want the tracks moved. We want a new modern railroad for Sioux Falls and this side of the state. But having said that, it is a very detailed federal process that we're two links removed from the federal agencies to the DOT and then with the city. Certainly, now fast forward, let's just predict that we're successful in finding a very good alternative for the rail switchyard and that the environmental assessment gets accepted, and then the land transfer happens between the rail yard and the city as a switch, then that land's available for the city to use as it wishes. And one of the key things that we've heard as we've talked to event center operators is that you've got to have your parking, good parking in place for day one, so the event center does not get a reputation of not having good parking. One of the criteria, or one of the factors with event centers, is their busy time is in the wintertime. And so, and in our climate, we want to make sure that we have as good a parking on day one as that we'll ever have. And so that's why we've factored in the structured parking to the south. And a number of those, we've tried to find those surface parking lots very close to meet those parking demands. So kind of a two-part question. Don, anything further? Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Councilor Karski.
Yes, I think this is a Mike Cooper question, actually. We talked about downtown, the need for additional infrastructure. And when looking at our 10, 15-year plan for what's going to be happening downtown, is that money that would have been spent anyway?
I believe as you have a chance to go through the report in more detail, that you'll see that there's a projection by AECOM of potential downtown spending. And I think the figure that they identified in there would be about $500 million, $500 million, of potential spending downtown over a projected time frame. But what they're saying is that as part of that projected spending, a portion of it could be, the time frame could be speeded up potentially with the downtown event center. So I think the answer to your question would be yes, a lot of that projected spending could potentially happen downtown, but the time frame would be maybe longer, or would most likely be longer.
So
that's the big difference as far as what I've seen in the preliminary report.
So even if we didn't put it downtown, that money would eventually get spent, just not as rapidly as what you're
And that's,
telling
again, based on a lot of projections and interviews with real estate people of what could happen downtown.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll ask a few. I never get through one, I guess, without there's no doubt about it that the spending $100 million would be a self-induced stimulus package for our community. I think that's great, the way that they've explained on how that would lay out. Certainly, we just got this information. We'll all pour through it and think about all the questions. You guys have had some time to pour through this, or did you just get it today as well?
No, we've had it over the course of the last week, as you would normally get a draft report and go through it from a checks and balances standpoint.
One of the things I see missing is Howard Wood Field. The last task force, when it came out, one of the key stumbling blocks was Howard Wood Field because of the traffic that place brings.
Mm-hmm.
It just blows up during Dakota Bowl or President's Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
How would that affect our $100 million asset sitting there one of those nights, or even any of those football nights? Has that been...
I'm going to have Don Deflitz come up. They actually had a meeting with groups and facility owners, and they talked about the conflicting nights. And Don, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we had a meeting with, was attended by Global Spectrum, SMG, the school district, and talked specifically about those issues. So that is one of the reasons we came up with the 880 spaces, as well as the review of the traffic report. So the basic conclusion that they came to is there's very few events a year we need to avoid out there if we build this amount of parking and have this kind of, and it was based on the assumption that you should be able to control the start times. So you're going to have a lot of events out there, but you're specifically not going to say schedule a 7 o'clock event for a 12,000 seat concert and a 7 o'clock Howard Wood Field event, and you can control that to a certain extent. But there's probably a few events out there that, unless you wanted a major traffic event, you would probably want to avoid. Although Terry from SMG said if he had the chance, he would still do it. And again, for those of us who live in bigger cities like Denver, there have been events where people say it won't work, but there's been events in Denver when they have the Pepsi Center with a sold-out event, a Rockies game at Coors Field, and an Invesco event for the Broncos, and you're thinking, how could this work? And somehow people figure it out, and they're warned far in advance, and people adjust their patterns, and instead of 2.5 people per car, they go 4.5 and 5 per car, and they shuttle from bars and restaurants, that kind of thing, so people can adjust. But the goal would be that that's only happening once or twice a year out there, and by adding the 887 and controlling the start times, you can control both the parking supply and issue as well as the traffic issue. And they felt pretty comfortable with that.
Okay, one of the other concerns I think that a lot of us have had is that the convention center as it sits today hasn't been a shining example of what we had all hoped for in a planning session similar to this. It didn't turn out to what we all wanted it to be. And some of us would feel as though we're spending good money after bad if we build this convention center or event center out there in a place like that, because nothing else has happened. How do we become assured that some of this forecast is actually going to happen?
Right, and I think part of it is it the number of events you're referring to, or the actual design of the convention center? We can control the design of the event center, so we can guarantee you that'll be a beautiful building. But if it's in terms of the events, again, both, certainly ones that are next to a convention center, there's no doubt they bring in events. together, and it creates the flexibility. But there's also the cross argument that downtown ones also create activity downtown. So both of those are true, and that's really the balance you all need to look at. But we are, again, you could argue the numbers that David came up with, but that is an experience we've seen. We know in the past you've studied about even the need to add additional convention center, and what you would be doing if you chose that route is you're adding a modern day event center that can also be used as a flat floor, so you're kind of killing two birds with one stone if you put this building out there. And so that's what you will all have to wrestle with and decide what's the best way to do it.
Speaking of the flat floor space, that is appears to be the catalyst that makes this thing work at the arena site. I mean, that's the fundamental switch. Would it be? Is there any credit left? I guess with our groups here with determining what if we just expanded our convention center and did not add an event center? What the impact would be to that? I mean, is there any way to extrapolate that out from these numbers at all? That
David will. That's economics. We'll have David talk to that one.
I mean, I don't know how big the floor is of the event center, but if we were adding that much space onto the convention center, that would sure be far less too expensive to build. If we could reap those rewards, maybe we're missing an opportunity that's staring us right in the face, and I don't know.
Well, it is certainly. I mean, yeah, as you said, the driver of, and as I said before, the driver of the differences and the impacts is really due to that space. So, whether it is a space surrounded by 12,000 seats or a space surrounded by 4 walls, we would still anticipate being able to bring in more events because of that, because they'd be contiguous to the other facilities. Certainly, it's not an answer I would want to give you off the top of my head. I don't want to sound self-serving or coy by saying this, but certainly it is a different study, certainly, to look at the different dynamics of two different they're two different facilities, essentially. But essentially, you would probably see in the results that at least the flat floor events would probably be fairly similar if you're talking about the same amount of floor space in a new facility, whether it's a convention center or an event center.
Right. One of the challenges I'm having is the idea that we're shoehorning this. Probably not a fair way to say it, but we're putting this great event center out there, and we've got all these other things happening out there, and only so much parking. And it just seems like we're just asking for trouble when we have a wedding or a convention, a basketball game, Lady Gaga coming, and I don't know what else could happen out there, but we're just asking ourselves for trouble. When
you're asking for trouble if you have Lady Gaga, period, probably.
That's right.
Sorry.
Hey, she's got some good stuff. I kind of like...
Sorry.
All right. Well, anyway, I mean, I just think we're asking for trouble shoehorning that in there, and I'm just wondering if we can extrapolate the numbers out of just the impact of expanding our convention center. That's what I was really after.
Yeah, and your last question, I would defer that back to Don probably in terms of what you call the shoehorning and making sure it works from having multiple simultaneous events going on at the same time. But I mean, yes, as I said before, I think having the space, certainly there would be impacts associated with it. Would it be exactly the same as what we have in our report? I don't know.
Okay. Well, I know there's other questions on the funding. If I could, if we could maybe move past onto that question, if anybody'd like to answer. Is Tracy here? Hi, Tracy. Hi, come on up. I was just wondering, is there I watched online and it was a little rough to watch, but is there only one plan for funding the way you've outlined it? I mean, is that the only consideration you've given, or have you guys thought about other options, other considerations, other ways to do it? I mean, I don't want to preach here or scold anybody in that fashion. All I'm trying to do is provoke discussion. But certainly, if borrowing the money is the only way to do it, we would have done that a long time ago. All the other mayors in the past would have provided an opportunity for us to borrow the money, but that seems too easy. I mean, that's the easy way out, just to go and borrow it. Have you guys considered other options and thought about other options? That's my question.
First of all, I should maybe say that the funding plan has not been developed yet. I think what I gave was a conceptual outline of what the funding plan could be. However, if you look at how other similar facilities around the country have been funded, it's very, very similar to the concept that's been laid out, that I laid out in my presentation. I mean, you look at the report that was done back in 2005. The one possibility of funding a facility is not available to us in South Dakota, to have an additional 1% sales tax. You know, that was an idea that has been attempted in the past through the legislative process and has not been successful. So we only have so many tools in the tool chest as to how to fund a project like this. I think it's the concept that's been laid out is certainly a potentially viable one. I guess we've got a lot of numbers to fill in, a lot of blanks to fill in yet at this point. But
okay, how about as we move forward? How about this? If there is a significant amount of private money that should come forward and help build and fund this facility, how much of that is a tipping point when it turns into what would be considered a private development versus a public development? You know, if 60% of the funds came from the city and 40 came from the private sector, and we go out and borrow or bond for that money, I'm running on a couple questions here, but the idea is, do we have to get that money from the private sector in our hands and take it to the bank and put it in an escrow account before we can actually start construction and go borrow 60%, or have you guys gone through all that? Maybe not
I'm
yet.
not positive I follow the question, but there are issues to certainly consider in terms of the makeup of funding and how much comes from private sources and how that money is used or on what conditions that money is provided. Those are really kind of some legal issues that would need to be resolved and considered as contracts for sponsorships and naming rights are negotiated. Those are some pretty important issues that we would have to be mindful of as we move forward.
Would that be something we'd probably hire a bond consultant to come forward and help us?
It would take some very specialized legal expertise, in my opinion. Now, I don't know, our own legal staff may have a different opinion about that. But that would be my opinion, that it's pretty technical and very specialized field of law.
Well, the idea on the tipping point of a private and public partnership, which would be great, is just the idea that if the public isn't getting involved in helping somebody else make money off of an investment, you can see where it gets a little funny on whether it's a public entity or it's a true partnership of some sort. And just some questions I had on the funding. You know, all this discussion on its impact and its location is just all so secondary compared to its funding. And I'm not sure what our strategy here is in the mayor's on your planning to share all this, but I would think that we got to get that figured out before we get too far on this other part. That's just my question on funding or question.
That's certainly a critical issue, and I think one of the key components of that we've been talking about is the amount of funding that could reasonably be expected from private sources in the form of naming rights and sponsorships and those types of things, and that's certainly a big question mark in my mind. We can see from other projects around the country how much other communities have been able to raise from those sources, but that may or may not be applicable to Sioux Falls, and that's, I hate to get on to another subject that you're going to be dealing with down the road, but that's why I think having a market analysis is pretty important to put some foundation under numbers that we've been using in the past in terms of potential for private funding.
On the funding, on the naming analysis, that's one of the questions, is whether or not you can actually, and I know this is running into the last presentation and as well as the other council meeting on the funding for the naming rights study, but the private sector, the guys come and tell us you could get $10 million to do this. Okay, it takes $100 million. You can get 10 from the private sectors on naming rights. So go only borrow $90 million, or do you have to get that $10 million in your hands in an escrow account, or do you still have to borrow the $100 million and just pay off the 10 when you get it? I mean, I just think. Go Go ahead.
Oh, and I think, too, that'll all structure on how those contracts are wrote with those respective private companies, whether it's an annual amount or if it's one lump sum. So you're going to see a lot more of Tracy as those things progress. The one thing I would say, too, I get the job of being the timekeeper tonight, and I do want to make sure that the City Council gets their questions answered really specific to AECOM, because this was their scope of work. This is how we've scoped them. They've a part of their scope was to be here at the initial and to present their findings. And so, if you have any questions for them, we'd really like to focus on those as we can. You're going to see, as we go into what we would consider Phase 2, you'll see more of Don Deflis, Coke Hazard's team, as well as Mortensen. And then last, we do need to start the panel discussion at 6 o'clock at the Orpheum. And so maybe within about 10 to 15 minutes, if we could wrap up those questions, that would be great.
Oh, Councilor Erpenbach.
Just one clarification and two brief questions, if I might. One, and I don't want to pick on you, Mike, but I want to make sure that this was clear that the AECOM numbers were 51 million, not 500 million. Am I right? Looking at this page, the total valuation in development downtown, the spin-off development, 51.1 million, not 500 million, just to clarify for the public.
No, I can actually clarify that. As you see in the report, what is planned today over a long period of time is about $500 million in development. What the intent was is if the event center was built, and the discussions that AECOM had with developers, it would start about 10% of that, which is about $50 million. So both numbers were correct.
Okay, good, thank you. Then I think you can also answer these for me, Mark. Do we have to, if we move the railroad on time, do we have to build that garage that's attached to the south side of the event center in the plan for the downtown version?
I think, it does create some very close parking. And I would say, too, that that's where the loading facility would be for that location of the event center. And so right above it would be, I would say very good parking close that that people don't have to walk. But I probably will have Don just address that from his standpoint.
Again, I think the answer is based on timing assumption. If these kind of buildings, usually if you have an anchor tenant like hockey, they usually open in the fall. And so if we open in the fall of 2014 and the tracks aren't gone until the end of 2014, you don't have enough parking. So that was the whole base assumption. So you should build the garage. The other thing is it does create a better, more expensive, but it does create a better building with direct access on the downtown site directly into the level of the concourse, the suite, so it would make it a more desirable building. And if you would delay it, the whole project, then you'll probably pay more even than the whole garage for the inflation for the whole project.
Gotcha.
So you're getting further behind if you delay the project due to construction inflation.
Okay. And keeping in mind that when the Quest Center opened in Omaha, gravel parking.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, if the tracks weren't there, I guess you could do that. But again, it's the difference between September and what the end of. If you could say absolutely they are available, then I would say fine. But if they're not, your building is branded forever as not a good building to get in and out of. People don't forget.
I think the Quest Center is doing okay, though. That's
that
kind of my
is,
point with that.
Yeah.
Then one more thing from Mike Cooper, then, please, if you could. I'm not sure I understood the answer to your question, or to Councilor Aguilar's question about McCart Field.
Okay.
Must it go to a public vote, or can we just say we're paving over a park?
As we've gone through our discussions with the Park Department and the City Attorney's Office, it comes down to that determination will be made by the City Council. The City Council will determine if that proposed development can continue to be classified as park use or if it needs to go to a vote of the people. So ultimately, the City Council will make that determination. But there'll be a recommendation from the Park Board based on, again, discussions with the McCart family, the users of those fields, and other data that would be put together as part of a recommendation to you.
Thank you. That's what I had. Thank you.
One more question for Dave, maybe, just to wrap up to make sure I get the right stuff here, because I get kind of wrapped up on the. I think everybody agrees that the entertainment center would be great for our community. Is there a number, though, that you have that just as a summary that says, forget the construction stuff, what's the annual impact to our community if we have the event center in Sioux Falls, at downtown or the arena site? Is there is one of these the bottom number? Which?
Yeah.
I just want that one.
Yeah. Yeah, this is probably the best summary of it right here. We've got the annual, from operations, the annual spending, jobs, income, room night, and tax revenue impacts. So I believe that's our third from the last slide. Is that right? Yeah.
So I read that 16.5. Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Did you do that? 16.5 greater.
And then this one focuses on the difference between the two sites, not the totals at each site.
Okay, what about the total, though?
That, if you could scroll up earlier to where we have the tables. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going a couple more. In this presentation, I have to refer you to a few different slides. In the report, it's summarized on one table. But if you could start where we are, actually, if you keep going more, that one, you start there. So I don't know if your screen shows what's on the screen that I'm looking at. So if you start with this slide and that yellow line,
okay.
Again, this is where you get the $16.5 million difference. And then if we go to the next slide, here's the jobs and income, which again, the difference is on that first slide we showed. And then the next slide, here's the fiscal impacts. And then I think the next one's the construction, which is not what he's asking about. So those three slides.
How about, you're right, we need to go through these. And
It's all in one table in the report, though.
Who do we work through if we want to ask more questions directly? Do we go through you guys or just call Dave? Call you?
Maybe you can collect them and pass them on. I don't know.
That's right. If you can, collect all your questions, and then on the economic study, we'll have Mike Cooper address those. And if it's on the site or the cost, those can get directed to me. So.
Okay. Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll let these guys go. They need to get going, right?
Mm-hmm. Counselor, just in summary, just really appreciate your time. This was obviously a long but good presentation. We feel like we've tapped the brain trust from some very good national experts. We certainly understand that you'll have more questions as this process moves forward, and we'll also do our best to answer the questions tonight of the public as they come to the panel discussion for question and answer session. So with that, thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Mark. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, we do have a land use committee.
No, if I might,
Yes.
I spoke with staff and asked, since there is, sorry to say, more interest in the 6 o'clock session at the Orpheum than there is in the land use agenda, the land use committee agenda will be moved to the next meeting, which is this same Monday next month. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for waiting. If you were waiting for that, I apologize, but things happen. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.